Please welcome Andrew Ross Sorkin and his guest, 42nd President of the United States and author of Citizen, My Life After the White House, Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton is here, everybody. 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, is here. Thank you so very, very much for being with us.
I love this place
today. The man, again, none of these guests need introductions, but his legacy is something that I think we all know. Was a booming economy. He brought his party to the center. Last month, he published a new book. It is titled Citizen, My Life After the White House, reflecting on his past 2 decades as a private citizen. We'll talk about it. During the 24 election, as you know, he was campaigning on behalf of the Harris-Walz ticket. And I just would say there is no better person, I would say, right now in this country than former President Bill Clinton to discuss what is happening to our nation, to our world, to the Democratic Party, and where we all go from here. So just thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Andrew.
There's a lot to get to, and I want to understand what you think happened during this past election and where we are going. But I actually want to ask you the elephant in the room question, because I think it's in the headlines. Everybody's crazed about it. And so I just want to go straight to it, if you'd indulge me, which is I want to know what you actually think of the pardon, of Biden's pardon for his son. This was not on my plan originally, but I thought, you know what? Everybody, we were out in the hallway, they were all talking about that, and I said, I'm going to ask the president first.
Well, I think that the president did have reason to believe that the nature of the offenses involved were likely to produce far stronger adverse consequences for his son than they would for any normal person under the same circumstances. But I would urge all of you to just look at the facts before you make a judgment and see what they're talking about and what the context is. Because I'm still reading, somebody said, well, this is just like when Bill Clinton pardoned his brother. Well, it's not. My brother did 14 months in the federal prison for something he did when he was 20. And I supported it. And he testified, told the truth about what he'd done when he had a drug problem and helped to bring down a larger enterprise. And they sentenced him, and then he served 14 months, and he got out. The real question was, would he ever be able to vote again? Would he ever be able to have normal citizenship responsibilities? And I've been sort of upset that there's been almost no discussion about the larger problem, which is, does the pardon system we have work?
Right. Now,
you can say, well, it's all up to the president, but the truth is, the way it works now is, if let's say you and I had childhood marijuana convictions or whatever, you apply for a pardon if you're a normal person, and they send it to the Justice Department, to a division of the Justice Department, which is supposed to do research and make you a recommendation. And most of the time, any president doesn't give a second thought to pardons for most of the week, in any given week. And when it got down sort of toward the end of my term, I looked around and I was absolutely stunned that there were this massive backlog of applications that had been sent to the Justice Department, and there had been no action. Why? Because you never get in trouble for saying no if you recommend it. Right. So all I'm saying is, you've got to see this in a larger context. I think Hakeem Jeffries said the other day he understood why the president had done this, but there were lots of deserving people who had gotten excessive sentences.
That's the broader piece. But let me ask you this. This is what Politico just wrote. They said, this is a rich gift to those who want to blow up the justice system as we know it, who claim the government is a self-dealing club for hypocritical elites. It's a promise-breaking act that subjects Biden's allies, right? This is the hard part, to yet another humiliation in a year packed with Biden-inflicted injuries. What does it do to the Democratic Party, to all those folks who were out there saying, no, rule of law this, rule of law that? He said he would never do this.
Yes, and we had a lot better record than the Republicans did, didn't we? And what good did it do us? I mean, that nobody believes in anybody anymore.
Isn't that the problem? But this didn't make it any better, though.
That didn't make that any better. But if my view of this is that that specific thing that you mentioned should be explained in greater detail. That is, I personally believe that the president is almost certainly right that his son received completely different treatment than he would have if he hadn't been the president's son in this kind of case.
By the way,
but like I said,
I don't think people, I think there's a lot of people who understand it as a parent, no question. I think the bigger question is about what was said for so many months, the last 6 months ahead of it.
You have to ask them that. I don't know. I've never talked to him.
But when you heard it, did you say, okay, this frustrates me? Does it upset you at all? Does it not upset you?
Well, in the hierarchy of things that there are to be upset about today.
This is not one of them.
No, no, it does, but it's not way high on there. I mean, look, I have been, you got to understand, I've been through all this. And you act like this is new. This is not new. We had 6 people, 6, in different cases when I was president who were being prosecuted by Ken Starr's people, told me they were screaming at him. Right. Wait, you started this. Told me they were screaming at him when they were being interviewed, you are trying to get me to commit perjury. 6 people. And all of them said some version of, what do you care? If you tell us what we want to hear, we'll take care of you. If we don't, we'll make your life, if you don't, we'll make your life a living hell. 6 people told me that. And it was never in the press. Nobody ever expressed any outrage. And a hell of a lot of people knew what was going on. So you can't take the politics out of these pardon decisions if the president's in any way involved. So I wish he hadn't said he wasn't going to do it. I think it does weaken his case, and it makes people freer to jump on him. But there's also a reason the Founding Fathers gave this pardon power to the president, because all kinds of things are always happening that you can't reconcile in terms of this, that, and the other thing, and you can't figure out how to solve it.
Let me try a different one out on you then. Senator Manchin actually made a very interesting comment the other day where he said, why don't you go ahead and that Biden should pardon President-elect Trump? He says, why don't you go ahead and pardon Donald Trump for all his charges and make it, it would have gone down as balanced. This way, it's off the table for the next 4 years. It just cleans the slate. You think Biden should be pardoning Trump? And by the way, some people think that Trump should be pardoning Biden.
Well, I do think we should stop trying to criminalize politics. But on the other, I think we should, both of us, because obviously, and the people don't like it and they're not going along with it from right to left. On the other hand, you have to ask yourself, if you do this blanket thing, is there anything a president could do that he would or she someday would get in trouble for? I mean, This is a no-win deal. That's why the power of the pardon was given to the presidents. And the people who wrote the Constitution knew what they were doing because they had imagined all these kind of things happening in the context of the 18th century. But I mean, they'd imagined this. And maybe there's a better way. Maybe we should have a system where everybody should be reviewed for at least restoring all their voting rights and civil rights. I'm telling you, an enormous percentage of the pardons that you never think about, people file for them because they want to vote again. They want to feel like they're citizens again.
Let me ask you a totally different question. I want to go back to this past election. Clearly, the Democrats lost, across the board. And there's a lot of soul searching inside the party about what happened and what went wrong. And I want to read you what Nancy Pelosi said and how you react to it. She said that the anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, this is when Biden was running, that there would be an open primary, she said. That didn't happen. And then she said, because the president, this is Biden, endorsed Kamala Harris, who, by the way, was here last year, immediately, that really made it almost impossible to have a primary at that time. Was the plan always to have an open primary, even a rushed open primary? Because if you remember what happened was, very quickly, he came out and endorsed her. By the way, you ended up, I believe you and Hillary endorsed her too, very quickly after that. And if you remember, President Obama actually seemed to take a little bit of time before you saw his endorsement. But what was happening behind the scenes then?
Well, first of all, there was no plan by anybody. Nobody had a plan because nobody knew what was going to happen. So when people started calling me about it, I said, look, President Biden won these primaries, and as a matter of law, they're his delegates now. So he's the only one that can give it up. And he's a stubborn old Irishman. I know about stubborn old Irishmen. I am one now. And he's going to have to make a decision here. And everybody, wanting to be the first person to get their name in the paper or on television for dumping on him, they're not going to have a lot of luck. People that he trusts need to go to him and make a case that it would be better for the country and for his legacy if he stepped aside. So eventually, that's what happened. And, excuse me, by the time it happened, it was only, 107 days to the election? There was no time for a primary. We couldn't have organized a primary that would have had a meaningful impact, and it would have been total chaos. And then same people that say we should have had a primary would have said, they can't organize their way out of a paper bag. This is total chaos. They've turned the country into raggy tag. And then the same critics would have said, what would work there? It was too late for a primary. And I thought the best we could do then was to try to unite and make the best campaign we could. Now, I'm not sure it was ever going to be winnable.
You think, and you don't think it was about her candidacy herself versus, you think anybody in that spot?
Well, no, I suppose you could have had somebody who was secretly plotting for all this to happen and therefore could know from the day one. He could answer clearly, here's what's going to be different, here's what's in it. Could answer all those questions. But look, the fundamental problem was that once we had all this inflation, the average person had not really lived through something like this for 40 years, since the 70s. And most people are kind of loosely connected to the political process. All the stuff all of you know and think about all the time, most people could care less until you get a lot closer to the election day. I remember, just as an example, I went through a year of a very tough primary, and it was brutal. And the White House was heavily involved in my Democratic primary and told me in advance they were going to be. I got a call from a friend of mine in the White House, said, "You're the only one can beat us." I said, "I'm running 5th in the polls." He said, "Don't give me that. Yours can beat us. And the press has to have somebody out of every election. We're giving them you. You will never recover from it. You will never know what hits you. You should not run, and in 4 years you can walk into the White House." So that's how my campaign began in 1992. And I said, you can't let somebody say that to you. So anyway, here's the point. That happened. So I'm going to New York to the convention. And we did a state of play survey, and more than half the people did not know Hillary and I had a child. And that's after I was out there for a year, and we'd had all these charges and back and forth. So what happened was Kamala Harris was a stranger to them. So it was almost impossible to think that if the president has an approval rating under 40% and all these things are in the atmosphere and she appears, that there's time enough for her to win. I thought she did, on balance, a good job. I wish we'd, I didn't have anything to do with the campaign in the beginning, but I think she would have been a good president. And I think she would have.
Do you think there's something that they could have done differently and won, or you think no? You think?
Oh, sure. If you know, but you don't.
You don't know.
You don't know. If she had known 6 months before, if this was some nefarious plan, and she's going to be prepared for it, she could have answered the question, what's going to be different? Well, I'm not going to renounce the infrastructure bill. I'm not going to renounce the CHIPS bill. I'm not going to renounce the Inflation Reduction Act and the limits on health care costs. But now we got to deal with cost of living issues. And neither I nor President Trump had much to do with the current state of play. So the only thing that really matters is what do we propose to do now? Look at my cost of living plan, look at his. Mine costs less than half as much as his and will help many times more people. And therefore it's better. That was her best argument, I think. But that didn't just come to people. And I'm old enough that I lived up through this last round of inflation, and it ate Jimmy Carter alive. In 4 years, there were 10.8 million jobs when the country was about half the size it is now in the 70s. And Carter, all he had was inflation. Nobody cared if there were almost 11 million jobs. That's what happened.
Mr. President, let me try this on you. You recently said that you thought it would be easier for a conservative Republican woman, when it comes to this question of whether a woman can win the presidency, it would be easier for a conservative Republican woman to win. Why do you say that?
Well, because ideologically, the people who attack, who are most likely to be against women are most likely to be conservative. So when people agree with you, it's easier to be for them. And if you look at other countries, Margaret Thatcher, the German chancellor, all these people, that's what I think is likely to happen. Hillary, in 2008, when she had the close race with President Obama, I think would have sailed home because she was the first woman from New York ever on the Armed Services Committee, because she had all these connections that, covered a sort of psychic space. But do I think a woman can be elected president? I do.
I got a different one for you, because a lot of people were talking about Josh Shapiro as a potential VP at the time. And I'm Jewish, so here's a question for you. I'll say the quiet part out loud. Do you think that someone who's Jewish could become the president of the United States in this day and age?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Shapiro's a great talent. And he's tough without being oafish. You know, he's a tough guy. And he knows what's going on. And I do believe he and there are several other now Jewish Democrats. We have at least 2 more Jewish governors that I think would be very good candidates.
Let me try this on for you. Maureen Dowd, this is her thesis on what went wrong. And I know you probably had a complicated relationship reading Maureen over the years. She writes, some Democrats are finally waking up and realizing that woke is broke. She said the party embraced a worldview of hyper-political correctness, condensation, and cancellation, and that this is what alienated half the country or more.
Well, there's something to that. She's really good at pointing out other people's faults. Like most of us are, you know. But I think one of the things that plagues the Democrats is they haven't learned how to disagree with the press without sounding like a left-wing version of Donald Trump. And we all know that his supporters don't mind what you say about the press, but the Democrats do, the liberals do, at least we think they do. And so I think there's something to that. But the most important thing is we have to understand that some things haven't changed very much in 30 years, except the mainstream media has nowhere near the influence it once did. But what influence it retains, it's mostly over Democrats and independents. And so if you're going to disagree with them, if you don't ever disagree with them, they'll beat your brains out because their number one goal is to disqualify somebody in every election. And now they can only disqualify us because the right has their own infrastructure. So you have to be able to do it, but do it in a respectful way, because you're not interfering with the First Amendment by saying, I'm for their ability to say whatever they want, but respectfully, I disagree with them. That's what I tried to do in this book of mine.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So this relates to the woke piece, which is in your book, you talk about the Clinton Global Initiative. And I've been now many times over the years. And one of the things that you've done, I think spectacularly, is you've gotten companies to commit to do extraordinary things, hopefully things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And we are now in an interesting moment in our country where, you know, this whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, of ESG, of environmental, social and governance, and things like this, there is a complete backlash to all of it. You're seeing it. And I'm so curious, as somebody who's been living it, who's been working on that very effort, how you feel about that.
Well, I think it's because we who are on the other side of that haven't talked enough about it in terms of what makes sense. I mean, it's the right loves this. They say you've got corporations out there actually hiring people to prove how politically correct their workforce is. And they're in business to make money. They're in business to be profitable. How dare they spend shareholders' money on political correctness? And they draw this cartoon, and they're really good at it. I give it to them, they're good. You know, old Trump, he's great. He's the best blamer I ever saw. He's good at it. And there's probably some truth to it somewhere every now and then. But here's what I've learned. I was the longest serving governor in America I've made. And then I was president for 8 years, and now I've run this big foundation, which was tiny when I started, and we've done a lot of good, I think. But I've made a huge number of decisions Therefore, I've made a not insignificant number of errors. And the one thing I believe is that diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous ones. And I just think, and I think you could prove it, I think you could fill this very famous space with all the studies that have been done showing that diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous ones do. And that's what DEI is to me. And if you're, one of the things you do is serve consumers, and they're all different kinds of people, we all like it when there's somebody that looks like us there. So I think it's overblown, the anti-DEI thing, but I think if we want to keep it and we believe in diversity, we shouldn't wuss out about it. And we shouldn't, you don't have to be hateful or arrogant or all that. You just have to say, I'm sorry, I disagree. And here's why I disagree. 1, 2, 3. And there's going to be plenty of room for white guys in suits like me and any kind of rearrangement.
Let me ask you a different question about President Trump. And in particular, I wanted to ask you about his tariffs, because you touched actually a little bit on some of the things you think about globally as somebody who I would argue was a globalist almost proudly when you were president, both in the book and actually in previous books that you've written about when it comes to tariffs and the like. You did not like tariffs. You liked the opposite of tariffs.
I didn't. You're right.
And so the question, I think, now is how you think our place in the world changes if we really do implement tariffs. We had Ken Griffin here earlier. He, I think, doesn't think that they're either going to come to pass or that it's going to get worked out in some kind of way. But how scared or not should we be? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Have you changed your view?
Well, first of all, let me back up. This one thing. Tariffs work best, least needed in an environment where competition is real and borders are open and we all live under the same set of rules. When it looked like we were moving toward democratic societies, even though we defined it in different ways, the argument was more compelling. Now, we know, for example, if you look at what China did, I supported China getting into the World Trade Organization. You may think I was nuts now. But Jiang Zemin was president of China, and he was a darn good one. And we didn't agree on everything. We fought like cats and dogs about some things, but he was a good person and an honest person, and he wanted us to be reconciled, our countries.
Right. Well, so what do you think of? Oh, go ahead.
So what happened? When the current president, Xi, becomes president of China, he decides he wants to stay for life. And I'm telling you, if you have a country where the leader wants to stay for life, it changes everything. Then their first priority has to be weakening the opposition, dividing the opposition, doing whatever is necessary so that you hold on. That's what happened to Putin.
So how should our position or posture change towards China then?
Well, I think we have to be vigorous in where I think they've been in violation of the trade laws. I think we should defend the countries that are affected adversely in the South China Sea. And all the things we're more or less trying to do. And I think we're going to be doing back and forth with the Chinese, and they'll have to decide whether to risk more armed conflict, and we'll have to decide how far we can go and try to meet them halfway.
I wanted to ask you about the relationship between the White House and the business community. And I think there's a lot of people we've been talking about Elon Musk a bunch of times this morning. And I'm curious, as somebody who's sat in your seat, how what your reaction was, for example, when you heard that, President Trump is making phone calls, for example, to folks like Zelensky and others, and somebody like an Elon Musk is on the phone with them.
I didn't have the same reaction a lot of people did. I mean, that this is inappropriate, because Trump's whole shtick is that all these rules and systems don't amount to anything. They don't have any real legitimacy. They trap us into too many narrow options. I don't necessarily agree with that, by the way, but I think Elon being on the phone call for Trump is being the richest guy on earth is far more important than anything else that you could be to him. So he's by definition qualified to do anything. He could preside over his funeral service. Because that's what he values. It's no big deal.
Do you think, by the way, wow. Do you think, by the way, that Biden should have embraced him, meaning Musk? The reason I ask is there's sort of a way to revise history, but if you go back in time, he was effectively a Biden supporter. He was somebody who cared deeply about the climate, and he was pushed, as you remember, away, oddly enough, because Biden had these EV summits at the White House and didn't invite him and sort of thumbed his nose at him, maybe on behalf of the unions, unclear, but. I sort of have this idea in my head that it's possible. I think it was
all about that. I think he was trying to reset the relationship, President Biden was, between the unions and the federal government, and he didn't want to be a union buster. And he was very proud of what he'd done to help ordinary working people in the circumstances where the unions would do well and prove that they could be good for the free enterprise system. That's what I think happened. And I remember actually at the time having a conversation with somebody suggesting that it might be worth taking a little heat from the unions to keep, because I think that Tesla is one of the most significant contributions to
you told
transportation.
Them that?
Yeah.
You told the president this?
No, I didn't. I told the people who talked to me about it, but I did tell some people in the White House that I thought, not because I thought he would do what he did, which is to, get on the Trump carousel, but because I just thought I think this whole thing that, I think, first of all, in America, our biggest emissions source is still transportation. And I think that the Tesla is a great car. And I think those that are wannabe Teslas are good. I think we're going to have to get used to it and go through a transition period. But I believed that it would be helpful if they were working together.
One of the other big issues that we've all been confronted with, and we had Bibi Netanyahu here actually 2 years ago, and then the president of Israel as well, just last year after October 7th, is the future of the Middle East. I think you were the last president to ever go to Gaza. There's obviously a ceasefire, or at least hopefully a ceasefire with Hezbollah. I'm not even sure that's still the case, given what's just even happened in the last week. Do you have any hope for what happens in the Middle East at this point? And how long do you think that Bibi Netanyahu remains in his role?
Well, he's been there longer than I thought he would be already. But once the attacks occurred in Gaza from Hezbollah, from Hamas, it was a lifeline to Bibi. In the beginning, it hurt him because clearly the IDF was not ready. All the fights that were going on within Israel about the rule of law and all the issues there made them more vulnerable. But he was in office, and he had a narrow parliamentary majority, and an otherwise very fragile political coalition got stronger because of what happened on October the 6th. And he was the commander-in-chief, if you will, you know, and he fought it back. And I think, look, I think what's happened there in the last 25 years is one of the great tragedies of the 21st century. And when I tell the young people, for example, who are understandably in America, or let's say they're super sympathetic with the Palestinians, well, they've been killed, a lot of those Palestinians have, and all they know is that a lot more Palestinians have been killed than Israelis. And I tell them what Arafat walked away from. And they can't believe it. I said, oh yeah, he walked away from a Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem, 96% of the West Bank, 4% of Israel to make up for the 4% that the settlers occupy that were beyond the borders in the 67 war. And I go through all the stuff that was in the deal, and they it's not on their radar screen. They can't even imagine that happened. And I tell them, you know, the first and most famous victim of an attempt to give the Palestinians a state was Prime Minister Rabin, whom I think loved as much as I ever loved another man. And so Rabin, he dies, and then Shimon Peres is defeated in the election, and where the rest of it is history. But you walk away from these once-in-a-lifetime peace opportunities, and you can't complain 25 years later when the doors weren't all still open and all the possibilities weren't still there. You can't do it. It's just...
Your voice just cracked when you said that.
Yeah. I'm an old guy. I have my regrets. That's one of them.
Mr. President, we are going to run out of time, and there's so much I wanted to talk to you about the book, which is called Citizen and is a very worthy read. I want to ask you a final question. It's a complicated question. It's not an easy one. I don't think there's a right answer. It may even be marginally uncomfortable, but I think that there's value in the answer, which is this. It's actually about character. It's about the character of our leaders in this country today. And I think a lot of people have questions about the character and how much character matters or doesn't matter anymore. We look at our current president-elect, who's a convicted felon. We're reading about things with Pete Hegseth. Charles Kushner is going to go off and be the ambassador to France. And you have talked about your own moral failings. And so I'm very curious how you think about character and the character of the country, but the character of our leaders and how much we should be focused on that.
Well, I think that depends on how you, like everything in life, it depends on how you keep score. So, do I think it matters? Yes. If you're running for office and you say, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, you should try to do it. And by the way, there is an enormous correlation throughout history in what American presidents say they will try to do in the campaign and what they actually try to do. So much so that when they don't, we know it. Like we know that Franklin Roosevelt did not balance the budget, and we're grateful to him because we know that the rules are different when there's a depression. We know that Abraham Lincoln did not maintain slavery in the territories where it existed when the Constitution was born. And we're grateful to him. But by and large, these guys try to do what they say they're going to do. And so is that good character or bad character? It sort of depends on what people think is good and bad.
But that's, I think, a question. We all, I think, sit and we read about people who have had moral failings, and we'll put them in that category if you want. But how we're supposed to think about the moral failing in regard to their ability to be a leader?
Well, it depends on what they are and depends on how much people know. It's amazing. Would we disqualify Eisenhower now? Would we disqualify Roosevelt now? Would we still let Harding run? So I think that in ways that matter, character does matter. But the voters have a deep-seated suspicion of letting anybody, including members of the press, tell them how to define character and what matters. Because there's no such thing as a perfect person. Nobody has run a perfect life. And people are determined to keep score. Do I think character matters? I do. But I bet my definition wouldn't be the same as a lot of other people. And what really matters is whether in this moment this happened. I didn't, I'll give you an idea where I'm an outlier, apparently. I was very friendly with President Trump for years. And he was very nice to me when I got out of the White House. He called me one day and he said, I think the way the press has treated you is disgraceful. And I want you to come play at my golf course. And we had a, good relationship for years. Even after he announced that he was going to run and he and Hillary were going to run against each other, I didn't take my golf clubs out of the golf course. But when he called the Mexicans rapists and murderers, and I knew how many Latino caddies he had and what kind of people they were, I got my golf clubs and left. I didn't think I was a better person than him. I didn't look down on him. But I knew I couldn't live with that because I think America is a great country in part because there's somebody here from everywhere. And we have to learn to live with that. I regret that we haven't had enough serious conversations about this whole immigration thing. I mean, we haven't, and you and I don't have enough time to resolve it now. But this is a big deal. If you don't want anybody here from anywhere else anymore, you need to think seriously about that because we can't continue to have 4% plus of the world's population and 20% of the world's GDP and grow like crazy unless we allow immigrants to come here and replenish the talent pool, and unless we get along with other countries who want to do business with us. So does that mean we should be suckers? No. Does that mean we shouldn't fix the border? No. But it means we ought to do it with a lot more respect and understanding and being on the level. There's a lot of this, that the border politics is just that, just cheap politics. But denying that it's a problem is not an option, and that got the Democrats in trouble because they were afraid, too many of the Democrats were afraid it was politically incorrect to stand up control borders. People hate chaos. And keep in mind, when I say these things, remember, any political statement you make is relevant if you're talking about somebody else's race. It's relevant only if it might have changed the outcome. But I think showing that we cared about an orderly border was a totally legitimate issue and would affect the outcome.
Mr. President, unfortunately, we are out of time. We could talk for a lot more, and I hope we have an opportunity to do it again. And I want to thank you so much for speaking to us about all of these different issues. Thank you very much.
You know,
President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, wait.
Oh, goodness.
When this guy was 12 years old or something, he went to work for the New York Times before he went to college, right?
This is true.
And then he wrote a book about the crash called Too Small to Fail. Too Big to Fail. Too Small to Fail is one of our foundation initiatives. But anyway, Too Big to Fail today is worth reading again because it was the beginning, I think, of a lot of the conflicted feelings of resentment against successful establishments in general and the finance sector in particular. It's really, and he did it a long time ago.
Well, Mr. President, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that kind comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bless
you.
Thank you.